Alright, now we're going to talk about the first story in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which is Dolan's Cadillac, which I actually didn't know for the longest time that, because I had read Dolan's Cadillac when I first read Nightmares and Dreamscapes, of course, because it's the first story, but at the time I read it, and I'm pretty sure it already existed, I didn't realize that there was a movie adaptation of it, let alone the fact that it starred Christian Slater, who I'm obviously a huge fan of. And so this movie just kind of snuck up on me, and the way it snuck up on me is kind of in the weirdest way possible. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but this was that movie where there was that headline from a while back where a teacher got fired for playing this to his classroom for some reason, for recreation or whatever it was, I don't know. But the headline had said that the teacher was fired for playing an R-rated movie to his students, and the headline called it a Christian Bale movie instead of a Christian Slater movie, even though it says Slater in the article, so I think they were just trying to get maybe attention with that headline by putting the more recognizable at the time Bale in the headline or whatever. But, and apparently the complaint was that it wasn't necessarily because the movie was violent, or it wasn't necessarily even because it was an R-rated movie, but a student had gotten upset over the fact that a lot of Slater's dialogue in the movie is like basically a dictionary of racial slurs, some of which I still haven't heard outside of this movie, which is probably for the better. And so, and then that teacher ended up getting fired after that student kind of went to a higher up and said something about it. And that's how I found out that this movie existed. And so eventually I sought it out and was thinking how one would go about adapting this story, because just as far as like at its core, it is very adaptable when you look at the whole story. But at first you might not think so, because so much of the story is devoted to the mechanics of his plan. And then once you cast Christian Slater as Dolan and you realize we're going to get to really see him in action and exactly what it is that he does and how he acts, because it's the thing where we do get the details of that in the story, but to kind of see it in action outside from just the like in more detail than the narrator can give us in the story, in playing with all like the whole, because as far as the story goes, we kind of start in what would be the middle of where the movie is, because as far as the backstory goes of why he wants revenge on Dolan is kind of, they tried to kind of pass by it, by saying like if you want to know what happened or you want the details of it, just look it up in the papers. And I kind of made fun of King for this when we talked about The End of the Whole Mess, which was the story that comes right after this in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, where the whole story is him saying, like, oh, I've got to hurry, I've got to get out this story as fast as possible. There's such an urgency to how fast I have to get this story out, so I can't, get caught up in anything. But of course, being King, he's going to write as much as he possibly can. And the thing is in the story, he's like, oh, if you want the details of why I want to go after Dolan, it's in the newspapers. You'll see it there. But then he proceeds to tell us anyway. And it's like, I do still kind of love King for that anyway, because it just shows his love of telling stories in general. But we do pretty much get the backstory in the story itself. Like I said, it's sort of balanced out with the technical aspects of what the plan is, but on top of like the motivation and what it's taking, and him basically being in like the way he describes like the Nevada heat and all that stuff is like you just want to collapse just reading the story, imagining all this work put into it. And it's like he talks about time passing by in the movie. The story sort of confirms that it's like, it starts off like being 7 years after his wife's death, and then by the time it actually comes around, it's about 9 years after. With the movie, I think he says that like years pass or time passes, but we never quite get the sense of that enough. But they're showing us just enough to where the movie doesn't even break an hour and a half, so you can tell like it's gonna do all that stuff that the story didn't show. But also kind of not, overindulge on details or kind of doing its own thing. But the thing is even when it does do its own thing, it does it really well. Like, it's as far as the writing goes, because there's a lot of really well-written stuff in the movie that you would think comes straight from the story, but it doesn't. It was just kind of their own thing that they added. Like how the opening narration where he's, like, describing Dolan in all these different ways is really effective in setting up his character, and then being able to see some of the stuff that he does that wasn't in the story that Dolan does, like how we see the whole thing where they just say in the story that he messed up and she saw it, and that's what happened. But seeing this in detail in regards to what it was he was doing, and then the whole how he warns her to stay silenced by taking one of the dead bodies and sewing the finger to the mouth, and it's like it really sets him up as this really sort of this character with like this gruesome past that will do just about anything and just doesn't give a fuck. And Slater plays that to perfection, but we'll talk about the details of Slater a little later. But as far as some of the exposition, because that's something that we've touched on a lot in regards to adapting the short stories to like feature length, is the exposition is going to be kind of slow. Actually, in TV episodes, it may be even worse because you have less time, where the exposition is going to be like super duper sloppy. But the movie handles that in some really great ways. Like the whole background on his watch is he just kind of says it to us as the narrator in the story. But the way they fit that into the movie is that because he's a teacher, he's just explained to his class that's where it came from, and it's like part of their lesson. And it's like that's a really kind of brilliant way to push that in there. And it does that a lot. And then there's also the moments where he like kind of talks to her with her from beyond the grave, and you're like, how are they going to translate that? Like, is it going to be voiceover or what? Or is he going to physically see her? And he does physically see her, and it's kind of startling and almost kind of takes on like an almost horror element, which people tend to expect from King, despite the fact that we've talked about endlessly that he's far more than that. It's always kind of nice when they kind of add a bit of a horror touch to it to kind of bring in the whole sort of King experience. And I thought that the way they handled that was done really well. And then, like I said, leading up to that, leading up to like the explosion itself that sets everything off, it's basically just us just seeing how really bad of a dude Dolan is, and kind of contrasting that with how happy they are as a couple until this thing happens. And the fact Slater's charisma, like normally this would probably seem really redundant, the Dolan scenes, but Slater's charisma, and where you're never quite sure how he's going to act towards another new character that comes into it or whatever, another girl that passes by or whatever, he makes it like really magnetic to watch that stuff. There's even one particular moment where because his first name is Jimmy, he refers to himself as JD at one point, and it's like, I feel like that was just for the Heathers fans, especially since this movie starts off with him causing an explosion. So that's in there, and then yes, speaking of the explosion, we do eventually get to that point, and once that is passed, and then this plan starts to form of revenge, and him following him around and all that, is about where the story starts. But I thought the movie really did a good job of setting up that first half by showing us the events they tried to gloss over in the story. But in an effective enough way, and like I said, really setting up the characters, especially Dolan, in a way to where he didn't specifically do the thing to us. He didn't blow up our wife. But because he's been built up so much in this way, and the way he's portrayed, we just as much as the main character can't wait to see this revenge take place. Because it's done so well. But I really like something else that they added to the movie, which is this scene between the two of them. And this is another brilliant way to throw in something from the story that might seem like exposition and put it to really good use in the movie, which is the whole arc of descent thing, which is the phrase that the narrator becomes obsessed with in the story. And in the movie, it's something because he's got a mathematician friend in the story that's not in the movie, and he's kind of tricking this guy into helping him figure out how exactly to set up this giant grave mathematically. And once the guy says arc of descent, the main character becomes obsessed with that, and I love the fact that he gets the phrase arc of descent in the movie from Dolan himself. And there's so much of that. Like, in the whole thing where the people that he kills in the beginning, he tries to bury in the truck a little bit, like bury them alive. And it's like the fact that he gets all of his ideas from Dolan himself is something strictly in the movie, and I think that's fantastic. That was such a great way to go. But then, on top of that, after that arc of descent thing, you have the scene in the bathroom where they actually have a face-to-face, which in the story, it kind of indicates that Dolan knows who he is, but kind of in a vague sense. Like, if he wasn't so prone to knowing everything about everything, he probably would have forgotten the main character by now, Robinson. But the fact that that's how, because of this sort of the way he is, he remembers everything. But the fact that they actually give them a face-to-face, I think, is just as effective, especially in the way that they do it. Because it sets up that whole thing of, if Dolan's face-to-face with him in this bathroom and knows who he is, why does he not just kill him? And he explains that in great detail in this scene, where he just completely strips the main character of any sort of humanity and says, I'm not going to kill you because I know that you can't. I know that you're not that kind of person because you could never, ever possibly have the balls to do something like that. I know just how weak you are as a person, so I can just leave you here on a bathroom floor and know that I will be fine because you are that below me and you are that weak. And he just strips everything of him, and it's really this perfect moment. Like, it's probably one of the most justifiable moments of why didn't the guy just kill the other guy in any movie. It's fantastic, and like I said, it takes Slater to sell this, and he absolutely does. And so then we go into that, and like I said, I talked about the whole everything he gets from Dolan, and there's even stuff that's a little too on the nose, but it's still kind of perfect anyway. Like when we see him hatch the idea of the whole bury alive thing, and how elaborate that can be, and then the whole thing where he literally says, okay, I'm over this, and then he says, I'm ready to bury my past. Like I said, extremely on the nose, but I don't know, it just works for me. In this whole scenario, it does. And then, of course, we get to the big moment. And when you read the story, and you think about them adapting it with the whole backstory and everything, like all the way up to what the initial incident was, to his wife being killed, to him plotting all these different sorts of revenge, will he just kill him outright with a gun, or will he do something more elaborate, and then this whole thing, and then the plotting, and the digging, and all that stuff. And so you would think, much like the story, once Dolan's in the hole, that's going to be like the last 5 or 10 minutes. It's going to be like just the very end and then so on. But no, they're going to stick with this. It is like the entire last third of the movie when Dolan's in the hole. And the way they were able to make so much out of this is honestly what I think takes the movie to another level. Which is just fantastic. Because you would think, oh, they're milking it so they can reach feature length when they barely even make an hour and a half. But no, this is the real strength of the movie, is stretching this out, this portion, as much as they can. Like, the other stuff they did well, and the idea of elaborating on what we know from the story in little bits and pieces is very well done. And like I said, giving us more Dolan, giving that scene between the two of them is all great. But the movie really, really takes off in a big way when Dolan's in the hole. And then going from there. And this is where Slater goes to another level as well. Because this is full-on proof. Like, seeing Dolan get more and more frantic and more desperate as it goes on, it almost feels, it's so effective, it feels like we're watching it in real time, even though there's obvious gaps where we skip around. But it's so... This is complete and total proof that Christian Slater is the fucking man and never, ever should have gotten stuck in straight-to-DVD territory. And I still don't know how that happened to him, but it is an absolute injustice that he doesn't get constant parts that challenge him as much as this does. Like I said, God bless Mr. Robot for existing and bringing him back into the spotlight that he should be in. Because it's performances like this that go completely under the radar. And it's like, I have talked so much about how Christian Slater should be above the stuff that he's been in before. But the thing is how did I go so long not knowing this movie even existed when it's got this performance in it? Is baffling. Like, this, this is something that people should know about. And as this goes on, and the way they keep playing with this, where we've got the stuff like, they add technology into it, which wasn't the case in the story, where we were before all that, where it's like, you know, he takes out the whole cell phone thing, so he's got no service, all the stuff in his car doesn't work, and then they use the whole screen where he can see outside of the car, and the fact that he uses that to show him like he can actually watch Robinson burying him, to just kind of keep, and they just keep adding those touches to this scene and keep taking it in these more sort of sadistic and torturous directions, and it like makes everything before it like so worth it, because it was like if this was all built up to like a 5 or 10 minute ending, it would be like, all right, but you'd probably leave just a little unsatisfied. But the fact that they stretch it out to nearly half an hour of him burying him, and the different ways they deal with this, bringing the sunroof into account, which is another thing that they've made themselves that wasn't in the story, where it's where like, you know, Dolan sees a way that he can potentially escape, and then he just keeps getting done in. And then it's that final moment, especially when he's putting the concrete over, and Dolan like gets one last look at seeing himself buried under the final layer, and it's like it's so twisted in this amazing way, and it's like it perfectly invokes just how much King can be sadistic, but yet taking King's story and adding their own touches to it in this way, yet feeling very much in line with what he would do. And then just the way, like, Robinson is, like, you know, taunting him. Even Wes Bentley gets to do, like, a Christian Slater impression really quickly. And even Wes Bentley, who is not the strongest actor by any means, and is not necessarily strong in a lot of the movie either, but this moment in particular, it's like they both knew they had to go all in. And even when Wes Bentley goes all in, it works. And it's, like, so visceral. And it's like the moment where he's trying to get him to scream as loud as the explosion is just, it translates so well to film, and it's done so well. And like I said, adding all these different touches, like, there's the moment where Robinson gets the call where the cop is finally like, hey dude, we've got all the evidence, we can actually get Dolan now, we can actually arrest him. And then there's actually that dilemma in mid-burial where he stops for a second and he's like, alright, what do? Do I let them take him, or do I finish it? Because it's like, and then it's like the whole thing of, well, how long will he stay in jail? Will it even matter if he goes to jail? And then it's like that whole thing of, and then I'll just keep doing it. And then it's just so well done. All these different additions that they made only enhance the story even more. Like, this is how an adaptation goes. And it's... So, and I love another thing that they did, instead of adding, there's something that they took out. And it works either way. It works that it exists in the story, and it works that they took it out of the movie. It works either way. How the story has an epilogue, where it's like, yeah, I still drive over that, and, you know, sometimes I take a piss if nobody's around, just to further say fuck you long after the fact. But then the whole thing of him being haunted by the images of, like, is Dolan in my car, is Dolan in my house, and eventually he and his, you know, visions of his wife kind of go away at the same time, and there's like a whole epilogue devoted to that, which is great. And they kind of allude to that. There's the moment in the movie where Dolan says, like, dude, I'm gonna fucking haunt you for this. But they don't actually go in that direction. That epilogue works in the story, but I love that the movie does not have an epilogue. It is just Robinson laying on the final piece of concrete on the road, and we see that he's been entirely buried, he's entirely hidden in the earth forever, and it's just Robinson laughing maniacally, and that's just how it ends. And that, like taking the epilogue out works just as well, if not better, especially for the movie's sake. Like, as far as adapting it for the movie, that was definitely the best call to make. But as far as the story goes, I do think the epilogue still works in that regard. But yeah, so this is probably like one of the better adaptations of King that we will see, as far as keeping the story exactly as is, but putting their own flourishes in it without taking anything away from it, and if anything, enhancing it with their own additions. And like I said, with that Slater performance especially once he's in the ground, it just works on so many levels. And in a movie this far off the radar, and it's like, I don't even know if this was a theatrical release, just maybe, I was talking about Slater being in direct-to-DVD land, which sucks, but it's like, this may be part of that. But it's like so above that in quality. Like the movie itself, the writing in it, his performance, all of it. And it's like, as far as King adaptations go, I feel like it definitely deserves to be much more known than it is. Or that could just be me. But I think it absolutely works as an adaptation, so that's where I stand with that. So I think the next thing we're going to talk about, we're going to go back to the Nightmares and Dreamscapes miniseries. We got 2 more of those, and both of those episodes left are actually in the book of Nightmares and Dreamscapes. So then we got a few more movies that are pretty high profile that we'll talk about as well. And we're almost done with this, and then we'll see how those go, and then we'll keep doing the verses and all that other stuff. And regular reviews will be coming before too long for movies released this year, eventually. So until all that other stuff that's coming, I think that's it for this.